And as Anastasia mentioned in her report, a few of the cable networks and major newspapers are starting to pay attention to this. But for the most part, it's not a major story. And even those who are, they seem to be focusing mostly on the arrests and not the reason the protesters are there in the first place. So I want to take a closer look at this, and to help me do that, I'm joined by Georgetown University journalism professor Chris Chambers. And also I've got in New York, rap artist and activist Marcel Cartier. And Marcel, let's start with you. You have been a part of this Occupy Wall Street protest. You've also done some pretty interesting rap songs, I know, about Libya and Egypt and the revolutions taking place there. Would you say that what's been going on, what you've been attending, is the start of a revolution?
Well, I think what we see right now is the embryo of a very broad fight back movement that may have the potential to grow into something larger. I initially went to the Troy Davis rally the day after his legal lynching, which took place in Union Square. And I think in large part that's what gave the Occupy Wall Street a great deal of militancy, because when we had a spontaneous march from Union Square to Wall Street, we were brutally attacked by the police. And the NYPD very clearly showed their true colors by doing that, by bringing out their batons, by bringing out rubber bullet guns, by bringing out tear gas, and having absolutely no regard for what was a very peaceful protest. So when we ended up going down to Wall Street and we met the folks from Occupy Wall Street, then it really showed on the police the fear that they had of people actually organizing. So yes, I hope that it's the beginning of a revolutionary movement, but we have to organize, organize, organize in order to get there. And not just on Wall Street, but in our communities. You know, we need an unoccupy Harlem, an unoccupy the Washington Heights, unoccupy the Bronx from the police, from gentrification, and we need to do it also in the areas that are hardest hit, which are those communities that I'm speaking about.
And Chris, I want to talk to you about sort of the
Sure.
media aspect of this. I know this is a subject that you teach a lot about in your classes, what the media focuses to cover and what they don't. Certainly, if you turn the cable networks on, at some point during the day, you will see some coverage of this.
Right.
But they're not so much focusing on the whole point of this protest. This has been going on, you know, for 10 days now.
Exactly.
RT has been there from the beginning. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, you have to look at the core bias of the networks. I mean, they do benefit from this. I mean, from corporate ownership of the media from the 1980s. But that's pretty structural and pretty much something that we all expected. What's underneath this is a basic bias in this country against this kind of grassroots movement when it's not from, say, the right wing. I mean, because look at the treatment that you have now. Even Stephen Colbert on Comedy Central, you'd think they would be very, you know, sympathetic to this. They've treated this almost like a three-ring circus too, and they've focused on the people wearing the funny hats and you know, the quote hippie unquote aspect of it, and it's, you know, smelly hippie people sleeping in a park, you know, and then protesting. I mean, that kind of bias builds up, and that plays well to basically the average American who's still wondering what's going on. Now, you can turn around and blame the government, you know, because it comes back to what the protesters are talking about. Had the president been upfront about this, set Eric Holder and the SEC, the FCC, the FDIC loose on these people in the beginning of his administration, maybe this would have had some traction. He didn't, but he had people like Lawrence Summers, you know, advising him. So you see that whole, you know, it's a spider web. You know, it's not black and white. It's not, you know, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals. Everybody's more or less on the same team. It's just who's extreme on the same team. These people in Wall Street are not on the team, and so
but
we
they're
don't
also
wanna,
the people on Wall Street also seem to be sort of the referees and the leaders.
well,
and the coaches
I meant the protesters are not on the team.
I see.
So they're going to be kind of off camera. We don't want to concentrate on them. So I know what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's not just me saying this. I mean, a lot of people have been tweeting about this. I want to read you a couple comments. Truth Excavator writes, CNN's Anderson Cooper went all the way to Egypt to cover protests at Tahrir Square, but won't go down the block to cover the Occupy Wall Street protest. Vinu Shurish says the only news about Occupy Wall Street seems to be about the lack of any news. Hashtag mainstream media. And finally, Nurse Agita agrees, tweeting, corporate mainstream media won't cover unless there's violence or blood. It's our movement. tweet, stand on the corner with a sign, hashtag Occupy Wall Street. So you see, this isn't just, you know, us kind of getting down on the mainstream media. People are noticing the lack of coverage or the biased coverage. Marcel, I want to talk to you. Turnout has not been as large as expected. There was talk that this would bring, you know, 20,000 people. And when you think about it, you know, New York is much larger than Wisconsin, but Occupy Wall Street hasn't seen these same types of numbers. I'm wondering if you think that there might be a connection between the media coverage or lack of media coverage and the turnout.
Oh, absolutely. And not only the media coverage, but the way that we've been taught in this society to talk about the concept of democracy. When we're taught that the United States is a democracy, which it isn't, but even if you take that, you know, for what they tell you it is, their, you know, full extent of participation that they want you to be involved in this process is voting. And I think that a lot of people are beginning to see that it doesn't really matter whether you vote in a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to get the same results. At the end of the day, you're going to get these bailouts. You're going to get gentrification. You're going to get unemployment. You know, everything will fundamentally remain the same. So I think that people are coming out now, even if it's in small numbers, because they're tired of being passive. They're tired of being told, put a piece of paper in a ballot box every 4 years, and that's your democracy. I think that if you look at the history of this country, the only way change has ever happened, whether the civil rights movement or anything after that, has been through people organizing in the streets. You know, we're taught a lot of times that it was a nice politician or somebody with a humanitarian spirit that signed the civil rights bills. That wasn't the case. People were in the streets actually ready to burn down the country. So it was like, you better hurry up and sign these bills, otherwise there will be nothing left. And I think that, you know, we are beginning to see that, and I think it's a process, though. The greatest ammo that the ruling class, that tiny minority of billionaires and bankers, has in their favor is the fact that the masses of people don't yet realize that we are the driving force of this society. We can shut it down in a second.
And I'm wondering, I want to talk to you, Chris, about one of the videos that's sort of gone viral in the last 24 hours, some instances of police brutality, and I want to play a little bit of the video that we've been seeing of a woman being sprayed in the eyes by police with pepper spray, and then we'll talk about it.
Pepper spray? Seriously? Pepper spray for what?
So, Chris, what kind of story do pictures like this tell?
Well, it goes back to the classic Bull Connor and the dogs that are in the civil rights movement, which got a lot of middle Americans off their sofas, basically. Now, the flip side of that is, if there's no kind of commonality between the protesters and the average Americans who are out of work, being foreclosed upon, et cetera, then, you know, those are terrible pictures, but they're going to be removed, and all they're going to do is motivate the people who are already pretty much motivated to go down there and to participate in Occupy Wall Street. There needs to be some kind of common thread here. Otherwise, again, what it'll be played as is some hippie chick who had it coming. I mean, and that sounds very harsh, but that's what a lot of people sitting in their living rooms will see. Now, it will motivate younger people. It will motivate people who follow YouTube. And these things going viral does have that ironic effect. But, however, you know, there has to be something else. You saw it with Troy Davis, especially with African Americans of all economic stripes. It's got to be that kind of oomph, attack me at my base level thing to get people out in the streets. That's what happened in Wisconsin, because people's jobs literally were at stake. And, you know, here it's a little more indirect.
It's really interesting, too. I mean, we also saw, you know, the New York Times and their coverage of it. They have been covering this to an extent, but one of their main big articles about this was essentially entirely about the lack of organization. I think a lot of the protesters down there would agree that there is that, but again, missing the big point. And Marcel, let me talk to you. I think that you're a native New Yorker. I think that your accent might say that, and I'm pretty sure I read you were from one of the boroughs. But, you know, New York City is a place where 50 of the top 400 wealthiest Americans live. Now, this is according to a new report by Forbes, and they have a combined net worth totaling $211 billion, with a B, $billion. Meanwhile, If we look at the latest U.S. Census data, that also shows that the percentage of people living below the poverty line has grown to more than 20%. So talk to me about this. I mean, you are a native New Yorker, Marcel. There is a growing gap between the rich and poor. I'm wondering, you know, are New Yorkers frustrated?
New Yorkers are definitely frustrated, but I think that, again, because we're taught a lot of times to be passive about things, we don't exactly know how to go about organizing. We don't know how to go about fighting back. A lot of people just become, you know, very defeated in a sense. And I think that's why a lot of people in our communities turn to, you know, alcohol, turn to drugs, for example. It's a symptom of alienation, feeling as if you're totally beaten down and can't do anything, you know, to counter the oppression that we face. I mean, if you take the 6 train from the Upper East Side to the South Bronx, that's only maybe a 10-minute subway ride, but you're going from the wealthiest community in the United States to the poorest community in the United States in a span of 10 minutes. And this is in the richest country in the world, the richest city in the world. It's absolutely insane. It's absolutely irrational. It's absolutely inhumane, but it will continue as long as the capitalist economic system is the one that runs the show. And that means that those tiny group of billionaires on Wall Street run the show. Those of us who organize in the Answer Coalition, which stands for Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, we're tying all of these things together. For example, it's not just about Wall Street. It's also about Troy Davis. It's also about the police brutality that happens every day in black and brown communities. Just a few weeks ago, John Collado was murdered in Washington Heights by an undercover police officer. And there was a huge march to Washington Heights. Where was the coverage of that? Where's the coverage every single time that somebody is beaten by the cops? You know, so I think it's going to take connecting the dots. Also, understanding the occupation of Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and now Libya. You know, because they're sending our poor and working class brothers and sisters in the military to go kill other poor and oppressed people. And it makes no sense. But the only reason they're able to do that is because, you know, we have all of this red, white, and blue, you know, USA ingrained in us, not understanding that, you know, the average American has very different interests than those on Wall Street. Those whose interest it is to uphold that red, white, and blue flag. That flag actually doesn't represent us at all, even though we're the vast majority. We are 99%. You know, like the slogan at Occupy Wall Street says. And
Marcel, I didn't mention this before, but we should tell our viewers that you were one of the people that was actually injured. I think you got a gash in your leg there or something. Yeah. So our best goes out to you. And just real briefly, Chris, we're almost out of time. He's talking about this protest, this march in Washington Heights. Again, reiterate for us just one more time, why are those kind of stories not covered?
Well, because the average American isn't invested in them as they might be, you know, the target demographics, the people who buy the stuff on the commercials, you know, who, you know, offered by the same companies and own these companies on Wall Street. So, I mean, it's a vicious spider web. But, you know, I mean, unless somebody gets killed, unless there's something that's viscerally going to hit everybody across the board, this is going to continue, this non-coverage.
Certainly important things to keep in mind, and we hope to keep covering them here on RT. Georgetown University journalism professor Chris Chambers, thanks so much, and rap artist and activist Marcel Cartier in our New York studio. Thanks so much.